In a small rural town, an 8-year-old orphan girl walks along dusty streets holding a shiny red apple, her only meal of the day, given to her by a compassionate vendor. When she spots a majestic white horse looking forlorn in a field, she approaches and whispers, "Are you hungry? I get sad when I'm hungry too." Gazing at her only apple, she makes a decision that will change her life forever. "Here, you can have my apple." What she doesn't know is that the horse's owner, a millionaire businessman, is watching the entire scene from afar. When he approaches and asks why she gave the apple to the animal, the girl's simple answer strikes him like lightning. What this wealthy man does next is simply unbelievable. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any moving stories. Thanks. Let's get back to our story. The morning sun poured its golden rays over the dusty streets of Harmony Creek, a small heartland town where time seemed to have stopped decades ago. The distinct smell of dry earth mingled harmoniously with the tempting aroma of fresh bread wafting from the morning bakeries, creating a symphony of scents that defined the simple yet welcoming place. Along the dirt paths, where each step kicked up a small cloud of reddish dust, walked an 8-year-old girl. Her bare feet, calloused by the harsh reality of life, left delicate prints on the dry surface, like small testimonies of her silent passage through the world. In her small, fragile hands, she held with extreme care a bright red apple, her only meal of the day. The apple had been an unexpected gift from Mr. Abe, the soft-hearted vendor who worked at the town square farmers' market. When he saw the girl eyeing the fruit with hungry eyes, something in his chest tightened. Without a word, he had handed her the most beautiful apple from his stand, and she had received it with a shy smile that lit up her thin face. As she walked through the familiar streets, the girl watched people hurry past, each absorbed in their own problems and worries. Women carried shopping baskets, men talked in groups about the failed crop, children ran between the simple houses with peeling paint. Everyone seemed to have a place to go, a family waiting, a real home. She, on the other hand, was in no hurry. There was no one waiting for her arrival, no table set, no warm hug at the end of the day. Orphaned by her mother since she was 5, she lived with a father who struggled desperately to find work after the last failed harvest had left so many men in the region unemployed. Her steps led her naturally to the outskirts of town, where a green pasture stretched out like a soft carpet under her tired feet. It was where she used to go when the weight of loneliness became unbearable, when she needed a moment of peace away from the pitying or indifferent stares of the townspeople. It was then that her eyes met a sight that made her stop abruptly. In the center of the pasture, standing out majestically against the green vegetation, was a white horse of incomparable beauty. Its coat shone like polished silver in the sunlight, and its proud posture spoke of a noble lineage. But there was something in the animal's eyes that deeply touched the girl's heart, an unmistakable sadness, a melancholy that she recognized immediately because she carried it within herself. The horse seemed restless, tossing its head from side to side, as if searching for something it couldn't find. Without hesitation, moved by an impulse that came from the depths of her generous soul, the girl approached slowly. Her words came out in a gentle whisper, as if she were speaking to a long-lost friend. "You're hungry, aren't you? I get sad when I'm hungry too." The horse turned its head in her direction, and for a moment, two lonely beings truly saw each other. She looked at her bright red apple, her only meal, her only certainty on that uncertain day. For an instant, her stomach protested in silence, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything since the day before. But something bigger than hunger, something more powerful than need, moved her heart. Extending the apple toward the horse, she said with a sweetness that brutally contrasted with her cruel reality, "Here, you can have my apple." What she didn't know was that, At that moment, she was being watched by someone who would change her life forever. Edward Miller had just left another frustrating meeting at the Agricultural Co-op office. At 52, he owned several large farms in the region and was considered one of the most influential men in Harmony Creek. His fortune, built over decades of hard work and smart investments, afforded him a comfortable life that many envied. But money hadn't managed to fill the void that had settled in his heart since Helen, his wife of 25 years, had decided to leave for the city in search of a life he couldn't offer. The large farmhouse, which once echoed with laughter and conversation, had now become a mausoleum of memories and silence. That afternoon, driving his truck down the road leading to his property, Edward felt the familiar weight of loneliness tighten his chest. The endless meetings about crops and prices, the numbers dancing on reports, the formal greetings from fellow businessmen, it all felt increasingly empty, devoid of real meaning. That's when he decided to stop at the pasture on the edge of town, the place where he often let Magnus, his favorite white horse, graze freely. The animal was his only true companion in recent months, a noble being who didn't judge his decisions or question his choices. As he approached the spot, Edward saw a scene that made him stop the truck abruptly. A small girl, in simple clothes and bare feet, was offering something to Magnus. The horse, normally skittish with strangers, was calmly accepting what she offered, lowering its majestic head in a gesture of gratitude. Edward got out of the vehicle silently, moved by a curiosity he couldn't explain. His steps on the grass were cautious, as if he feared breaking the spell of that moment. When he got closer, he could see that the girl had given a red apple to the horse, which was devouring it with evident pleasure. "Why did you give him the apple?" Edward asked, his voice coming out softer than he intended. The girl turned, and he could see a small face, marked by a hard life, but with eyes that shone with a special light. She showed no fear or embarrassment, just a disarming naturalness. "Because I could tell he was hungry, just like I get hungry," she answered, her childish voice carrying a wisdom that didn't match her age. The words hit Edward like a lightning bolt. Memories of his own poor childhood, when he too had known hunger and uncertainty, came flooding back with overwhelming force. He remembered the times when his mother would divide the little bread they had, always making sure he ate before she did. "You don't have anything else to eat?" he asked, feeling a tightness in his chest. The girl smiled with a serenity that unsettled him even more. "No, but I'm used to being hungry. It doesn't matter." Edward stood in silence for a long moment, absorbing the devastating response. How could such a small child talk about hunger so matter-of-factly? How could she give her only meal to an unknown animal without hesitation? "And what's your name?" he finally asked. "Maria," she replied, gently stroking Magnus's muzzle. "And you're his owner, right? He's so beautiful." "Yes, I'm Edward. Magnus has been my horse for many years." He paused, watching the interaction between the girl and the animal. "Do you like horses?" "I like all animals," Maria said, her eyes shining. "They never lie, they're never cruel, they just want affection and food. Like everyone else." Edward felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if this simple girl had touched a part of his soul he had forgotten existed. "Do you live around here?" he asked, already planning how he could help her. "I live in town with my dad. He's looking for work." Maria petted Magnus one last time. "I have to go now, before it gets dark." Edward watched her walk away, her bare feet kicking up small clouds of dust. When she disappeared among the trees, he turned to Magnus, who looked at him with an expression that seemed almost human. "What just happened here, my friend?" he murmured, stroking the horse's neck. That night, Edward couldn't sleep, the image of the girl and her words echoing incessantly in his mind. Dawn arrived laden with expectation for Edward. For the first time in months, he had woken with a clear purpose: to find the extraordinary girl who had touched his heart so profoundly. During the sleepless night, he planned how he could help her without seeming intrusive or scaring her away. He prepared a basket with fresh bread, fruit, and some pastries he had bought at the best bakery in town. His intention was simple: to ensure Maria had a decent meal and perhaps find out more about her situation. The girl's generous act deserved to be reciprocated, and he felt an urgent need to do something meaningful. He drove to the pasture where Magnus was grazing, arriving earlier than the previous day. The horse greeted him with a soft nicker, as if it too were waiting for the special girl's visit. Edward petted the animal while he waited, his eyes scanning the horizon for the small figure who had made such an impression on his life. The hours passed slowly. The sun climbed higher in the sky, the heat increased, but there was no sign of Maria. Edward began to worry, wondering if she was okay, if she had found something to eat, if her father had found work. Anxiety grew inside him like a creeping shadow. He decided to leave Magnus in the pasture and walk into town, searching for the girl on the familiar streets. He took the basket with him, hoping to find her somewhere. His discreet questions to the townspeople led nowhere. Everyone knew of poor children, but no one seemed to know Maria specifically. It was when he passed by Mr. Gable's bakery that he heard raised voices coming from inside. One of them, high-pitched and frightened, made his heart pound. It was Maria's voice, but filled with a tension that hadn't been there the day before. "I didn't steal it. I was just borrowing it. I'll pay you back. I promise." The girl's voice sounded desperate, almost panicked. Edward approached the entrance and saw a scene that filled him with a mixture of anger and compassion. Maria was backed against the counter, her eyes wide with fear, while Mr. Gable, a burly man with a severe expression, pointed an accusing finger at her. "Borrowing!" the baker yelled, his face red with indignation. "You came in here, grabbed 2 loaves of bread, and walked out without paying. That's stealing, girl. Plain and simple. But I was going to pay you back later, when my dad gets a job." Maria tried to explain, her words tumbling out. "I'm not a thief. I was just so hungry." "That's the story they all tell." Gable slammed his hand on the counter, making Maria flinch. "You have no money, no way to pay, and you want me to believe your promises. I'm tired of people like you." Edward felt his indignation rise. How could an adult treat a child that way? He stepped into the bakery, his presence immediately noticed by both of them. "What's the problem here?" he asked, his voice firm but controlled. Gable straightened up, instantly recognizing one of the wealthiest men in the region. "Oh, Mr. Miller, good of you to stop by. This girl here stole bread from my bakery. I was just about to call the sheriff." Maria looked at Edward with a mixture of relief and shame. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked like she wanted to disappear. "How much were the loaves?" Edward asked, taking his wallet out. "It's not about the money, Mr. Miller," Gable said, though his eyes lit up at the sight of the bills. "It's the principle of the matter. These kids need to learn they can't just take what they want." Edward paid for the bread without arguing, but Gable wasn't finished. "Mr. Miller, let me give you some advice. Don't trust this girl. She won't pay her debts and will only take advantage of you. People like her always find a way to get ahead at others' expense." The baker's words planted a seed of doubt in Edward's heart. Could it be that his first impression of Maria was wrong? Was she really a little con artist, as Gable suggested? Maria left the bakery in silence, her hurried steps revealing her urgency to escape the humiliating situation. Edward followed her, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts that threatened to shake his faith in the goodness he had seen the day before. Edward caught up with Maria on the street, his long strides easily matching hers. The girl walked with her head down, her small shoulders slumped with the weight of shame. When he gently touched her arm, she stopped, but didn't dare lift her eyes. "Maria," he said softly, "are you okay?" She finally looked up at him, and Edward saw tears shining in her eyes. "I'm not a thief, Mr. Miller. I was just so hungry, and I thought I could borrow it." "I know," he replied, his heart aching. "You don't have to explain it to me, but now you'll think I'm a liar, just like everyone else." Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. My dad always says that rich people think all poor people are thieves. Edward knelt to be at her eye level, an action that surprised a few passers-by. I don't think that about you, Maria, but I need to understand your situation better. You said you have other debts in town. The girl's face closed off as if she had been caught in a trap. A few, she admitted quietly, but I always promise to pay them back. I'm not lying when I say I will. How many people do you owe? Edward asked, trying to keep his voice neutral, though he felt a growing unease. Mrs. Gable at the butcher shop gave me a piece of cheese last week. Mr. Henderson from the general store let me take a pack of crackers when I fainted from hunger. The lady at the market always saves the bruised fruit for me. Maria listed the debts as if it were a memorized prayer. I don't forget anyone who helps me. Edward felt a mix of compassion and concern. The girl did seem to have a network of small creditors around town, which lent some credibility to the baker's words. But there was something in the way she spoke, a desperate sincerity, that kept him from condemning her. And your father, what does he think about all this? Maria hesitated, her eyes dropping to the ground. He doesn't know about all of it. He gets really mad when he finds out I've been begging for handouts, as he calls it. He's a proud man, you see. He doesn't like people thinking he can't take care of me. But you need to eat, Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. I know. That's why I only ask when I can't stand it anymore. And I always promise to pay because my dad says one day things will get better for us. Maria looked at him with hopeful eyes. Do you think they can get better? Edward didn't know what to say. He had seen so many poor families in the region, so many unfulfilled promises, so many dreams shattered by cruel reality. But there was something about Maria that made him want to believe. Where exactly do you live? He asked, changing the subject. On the street behind the church in a little blue house. My dad's there now looking for work in the old newspapers. Maria sighed. He's always looking, but he never finds anything. Edward knew that area. It was where the poorest laborers in town lived, in simple houses that barely offered adequate shelter. Can I talk to him? Better not, Maria said quickly, a shadow of fear crossing her eyes. And he doesn't like strangers, and if he finds out I took bread from the bakery without paying, he'll get very, very mad at me. Does he hit you? Edward asked, his voice tense. No, he never hits me. Maria defended her father immediately. He just yells and gets sad and says I'm a disgrace to our family. That's worse than getting hit. Edward felt a lump in his throat. The situation was more complex than he had imagined. A child trapped between hunger and family pride, between the need to survive and the desire not to disappoint her father. Maria, I brought you some food, he said, remembering the basket he had left in his truck. Would you like to eat something? The girl's eyes lit up, but she hesitated. You're not going to want me to pay you back later? The innocent question hit Edward like a punch. No, Maria, never. But as they walked toward the truck, a voice in his mind echoed the baker's words, don't trust this girl, and Edward wondered if he was being generous or just naive. 2 days had passed since the encounter at the bakery, and Edward couldn't get Maria out of his thoughts. He had left the basket of food with her, watching her eyes light up with gratitude as she devoured a roll with a hunger that would break any heart. But the baker's words kept echoing in his mind, creating a persistent doubt that bothered him. That afternoon, while reviewing farm reports in his office, he was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Rosa, his housekeeper of over 10 years. The woman entered with a worried expression, her hands nervously smoothing her apron. Mr. Miller, there's a man at the door who wants to speak with you, says it's about a girl you know. Edward's heart quickened. What does he look like? Thin, a bit shabby, but polite. Says his name is John and that he's the father of the girl, Maria. Edward stood up immediately. It was time to meet Maria's father and, perhaps, better understand the family's real situation. Show him in. Rosa. John entered the office with hesitant steps, his eyes scanning the luxurious room with a mixture of awe and discomfort. He was a man in his 40s, visibly thin, with worn but clean clothes. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had faced many disappointments but still maintained an admirable dignity. "Mr. Miller," John asked, removing a worn cap. "I'm John Davis, Maria's father. I heard you've taken an interest in my daughter. Please, have a seat," Edward offered, gesturing to a chair. "Your daughter is a very special girl. How did you hear about our meeting?" John sat on the edge of the chair, clearly uncomfortable. "Maria told me a rich man gave her food. In our situation, Mr. Miller, news like that travels fast." "I see. And what can I do for you?" John swallowed hard before speaking, his words coming out with difficulty. "Mr. Miller, I'm a man of dignity. I've always worked honestly, supported my family with the sweat of my brow. But since I lost my job after the last harvest, our life has been turned upside down." Edward watched the man, noticing how his hands trembled slightly. "I can imagine it's been very difficult." "You can't imagine," John continued, his voice gaining a desperate intensity. "To see my daughter go hungry, wear mended clothes, walk around barefoot, it kills a father inside. It really does, Mr. Miller. I understand your pain. That's why I came here today." John leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "I heard you're a good man, with a generous heart. My wife, God rest her soul, always said Maria was special, that one day she would bring luck to our family." Edward felt something strange in the way John spoke, a theatricality that didn't match the sincerity he had seen in Maria. "What exactly are you asking me for, Mr. Davis?" "I'm asking for an opportunity, Mr. Miller, a chance to show that I'm a hard worker. But while that doesn't happen..." John hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. "Maria needs new clothes for the coming winter, shoes, and our house has problems with the roof. When it rains, the water comes right in." Edward began to understand where the conversation was heading. How much would it take to fix the roof? John's eyes lit up. "Well, the cheapest materials would cost about $200. But if we could use better shingles, the kind that last longer, it would be around $500. And with that extra money, I could buy some decent clothes for Maria to wear to school." "Maria doesn't go to school. She can't, Mr. Miller. She doesn't have proper clothes, no supplies. The other kids make fun of her." John lowered his head dramatically. It's a shame for a father to see his daughter excluded like that. Edward felt a pang of suspicion. There was something too calculated about this conversation, as if John had rehearsed every word. "Man, how much would it cost to enroll Maria in school?" "Well, enrollment is free, but there are the clothes, the books, the supplies." John paused for calculated effect. "About $300 would get her started, right? So, $800 in total. You're very generous to even consider helping," John said, but Edward could see the expectation in his eyes. Edward got up and walked to the window. Something wasn't right. The way John presented the numbers, the ease with which he increased the amounts, the rehearsed manner of speaking about Maria, it all contrasted sharply with the genuine naturalness he had seen in the girl. "Mr. Davis," Edward said, turning to face the man, "may I visit your home to see the condition of the roof for myself?" John's face paled slightly. "Of course, Mr. Miller, but maybe it's best to call first. Maria gets embarrassed when we have visitors." Edward nodded, but an uneasy suspicion began to grow in his chest. Edward gave John the requested money, but he decided he needed to investigate the family's situation more deeply. There was something in Maria's father's words that didn't fit with the image of the honest, genuine girl he had met. The discrepancy bothered him profoundly. The next day, disguised in simple clothes and a baseball cap, Edward walked down the street behind the church, looking for the blue house Maria had mentioned. It wasn't hard to find: a small, modest structure with peeling paint and a neglected yard. But what caught his attention most was the roof, which seemed to be in reasonable condition, far from the dramatic situation John had described. Hiding behind a tree, Edward watched the house for some time. It was then that he saw Maria come out, carrying an empty bucket. Her movements were careful, as if trying not to make a sound. She walked to the community spigot on the street and filled the bucket with water. As she turned to go back, Edward approached. "Maria!" The girl nearly dropped the bucket in surprise. "Mr. Miller, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see where you live. Your father came to visit me yesterday." Maria's face changed instantly, an expression of concern taking over her features. "He went to talk to you." "What did he say?" "He talked about the roof, about your needs." Edward carefully watched the girl's reaction. Maria looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Miller, my dad. He sometimes exaggerates things. The roof isn't that bad. He told me you needed $800. $800! Maria's eyes widened. But that's so much money. We've never seen that much money all at once." Edward's heart sank. Maria's genuine surprise confirmed his suspicions about her father's lies. "Maria, did you know your father was going to come see me?" "No," she answered quickly, then hesitated. "I mean, he said he might go talk to you, but I asked him not to. I told him you had already been very good to me." "Why didn't you want him to come see me?" Maria glanced at the house, as if afraid of being overheard. Because when my dad gets desperate, he makes things up. Not to be mean," she hurried to explain. "He just wants our life to get better, but he tells things in a way that isn't exactly true." "What kind of things?" "Like that time he told Mrs. Gable I was sick and needed expensive medicine, just to borrow some money. I wasn't sick, Mr. Miller, just really hungry." Maria sighed heavily. "He said it wasn't a lie because being hungry is a kind of sickness." Edward felt a mixture of anger and compassion. "And you, what do you think about that?" "I don't like it when he does that," Maria admitted quietly. "My mom always said a lie can't run far. But I understand that he's desperate. It's really hard to see your child in need. Have you ever tried talking to him about it?" "I've tried, but he gets angry, says I'm too young to understand the hardships of life." Maria looked at Edward with pleading eyes. "Mr. Miller, you gave him the money, didn't you?" Edward nodded, watching the anguish on the girl's face. "He's going to spend it all on drink," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "He always does that when he gets money. He says he drinks to forget his problems." The revelation hit Edward like a blow. "And you? What happens to you then?" "I hide out here until he falls asleep. When he drinks, he gets really sad and yells a lot." Maria wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. "Mr. Miller, are you going to stop being my friend now that you know the truth about my dad?" Edward knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his. "Maria, I will never stop being your friend. You are not responsible for your father's actions. But people always think that the child of a bad person is bad too. I don't think that way. You showed me who you really are when you gave your apple to Magnus. That gesture didn't lie, Maria." The girl smiled shyly. But Edward could see the weight she carried on her shoulders. So young, and already facing moral dilemmas that many adults couldn't resolve. The revelation about Maria's father had left Edward deeply disturbed, but also more determined to help the girl. Over the next few days, he discreetly visited a few establishments in town, paying off the small debts Maria had incurred. Every merchant told the same story: a polite girl who always promised to pay and never caused any trouble. It was a sunny morning when Edward received an unexpected visit that would completely change the course of events. Carolyn Albright, one of the most influential women in local society, entered his office accompanied by two other ladies from Harmony Creek's elite. "Edward, darling," Carolyn said in her melodious yet authoritative tone, "we need to talk to you about a delicate matter." Edward stood to greet them, already sensing the conversation would not be pleasant. "Of course, Carolyn. How can I help you?" "It's about this situation with the orphan girl," said Helen Prescott, another prominent figure in town. The whole town is talking about your charity towards her. I see no problem in helping a child in need, Edward replied, keeping his voice controlled. Oh, but there is a problem, dear. Carolyn sat down uninvited, her two companions doing the same. You're setting a terrible example for the community. You're encouraging idleness and creating unrealistic expectations among the poor families. Edward felt his anger rise but maintained his composure. How so? Since you started helping this girl, other poor families have been showing up in town, expecting the same treatment, explained Marcia Sloan. The third woman. Just yesterday, a family from out of town set up camp in the square, saying they heard there's a rich man here who helps poor children. And that's a problem. Of course, it is. Carolyn slapped her purse on her lap. Harmony Creek has always been an orderly town where everyone knows their place. You are disturbing that harmony. Edward walked to the window, trying to control his indignation. And what exactly do you expect me to do? Stop helping the girl immediately, Helen said firmly. Send her away. Make it clear that she can no longer count on your charity. People need to learn to fend for themselves. You're asking me to abandon an 8-year-old child. We're asking you to be responsible to the community. Carolyn stood up, her voice taking on a threatening tone. Edward, you are one of the pillars of this town. Your reputation, your businesses, your social standing, all of it could be affected if you continue with this eccentricity. Is that a threat? It's a friendly warning, Marcia smiled, but her smile was cold. The town council is very concerned about this situation. There are rumors they might review some of your contracts with the city. Edward felt his blood boil. His city contracts represented a significant portion of his business, and these women knew it. Are you blackmailing me? We're just explaining the natural consequences of your actions. Carolyn adjusted her purse. A word from us can make a big difference in public opinion, Edward. And you know how important it is to maintain a good reputation in business. After the women left, Edward was alone in his office, facing the most difficult dilemma of his life. On one side, an innocent girl who had touched his heart with her genuine kindness. On the other, his social standing, his businesses, the entire life he had built over decades. That afternoon, he went to the pasture where Magnus grazed, needing to think clearly. It was there he found Maria, as always, gently stroking the horse. "Mr. Miller!" She ran towards him, but stopped when she saw his somber expression. Did something happen? Edward looked at that innocent little face, at the eyes that shone with joy at seeing him, and felt his heart break. How could he explain to a child that the adult world was cruel and cowardly? "Maria, we need to talk." The girl sensed the gravity in his voice and approached slowly. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, you didn't do anything wrong. You never have." Edward took a deep breath. "But some people in town aren't happy about our friendship." "Why not?" How could he explain prejudice and social cruelty to an 8-year-old? They think it's not appropriate for a man like me to be friends with a girl like you." Maria lowered her head, and Edward saw a tear run down her cheek. "I knew this would happen. It always does. People get tired of me." "Maria, it's okay, Mr. Miller. I understand." She looked at him with a startling maturity. "You have an important life, and I'm just a poor girl who causes trouble." At that moment, Edward had to make the most important decision of his life. Edward watched the tears stream down Maria's face and felt something break inside his chest. Suddenly, all the social pressures, all the veiled threats, all the contracts at risk seemed insignificant compared to this child who had touched his soul so deeply. "Maria," he said, kneeling to be at her eye level, "look at me." The girl raised her eyes, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on falling. "You've only known me for a few weeks, but in that time, you've taught me more about kindness and generosity than I've learned in 52 years of life." Edward took her small, dirty hands in his. "When you gave your only apple to Magnus, you showed me what it means to have a true heart. But the important people in town, The important people? Edward smiled, but his eyes were serious. Maria, do you want to know who the most important person I know is? It's an 8-year-old girl who would rather go hungry than let an animal suffer. It's someone who carries the world on her shoulders but still finds the strength to smile. Maria looked at him in confusion. I don't understand. I've spent my whole life trying to impress people who aren't worth a single hair on your head, Edward continued, his voice gaining conviction. I've accumulated money, earned respect, built a reputation, and for what? To live in an empty house, surrounded by fake people who only seek me out when they need something. Mr. Miller, no, let me finish. He took a deep breath. Do you know what happened to my wife? She left me because she said I had become a cold, calculating person who only thought about business and appearances. And she was right. Maria wiped her eyes, paying full attention to his words. But you, Maria, you made me remember who I really am, or rather, who I can be. Edward smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in months. So know this, I am not going to abandon you, ever. Even if it causes you trouble, especially if it causes me trouble, because the problems worth facing are the ones that arise when we do what's right. Maria threw herself into his arms, and Edward felt an emotion he had forgotten existed. It was as if a father were hugging his daughter for the first time. Now, he said, pulling back to look her in the eyes, I need to ask you a very serious question. Maria nodded, still wiping away tears. How would you feel if I officially adopted you? If you came to live with me, went to a good school, and had everything a child deserves? Maria's eyes widened. Really? You would do that? Only if you want to, and only if we can resolve the situation with your father. The girl's face darkened. He'll never let me. He says, I'm all he has in the world. Then we'll talk to him together. We'll show him that this would be the best thing for you. At that moment, as if fate had overheard their conversation, John appeared, staggering down the road. He was visibly drunk, shouting Maria's name. Maria, where are you, girl? Get over here now! Maria shrank behind Edward, who stood up, placing himself between her and her father. Mr. Davis, Edward said firmly. We need to talk. John focused his eyes on Edward with difficulty. Oh, it's you. The rich man filling my daughter's head with ideas. He pointed a trembling finger at Edward. You think you can buy my daughter with your money? I don't want to buy anything. I want to offer Maria a chance at a better life. A better life? John laughed bitterly. She doesn't need a better life. She needs to learn that life is hard, that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Dad, please. Maria tried to approach, but Edward held her back gently. You drank all the money I gave you, didn't you? Edward asked, keeping his voice calm. So what? It was my money. I can do what I want with it. John staggered. And my daughter is mine too. Nobody is going to take her from me. Edward realized that a rational conversation was impossible in John's current state. But he also noticed something more worrying. The man's desperation was turning into something dangerous. Maria is coming home with me now, Edward said firmly. When you're sober, we'll talk. She's not going anywhere, John yelled, taking a threatening step toward them. The tension in the pasture was palpable. John, with bloodshot eyes and stumbling steps, approached Edward and Maria with an expression that mixed anger and despair. Edward stood firm between him and the girl, who clung to his shirt with trembling hands. You have no right, John shouted, his voice echoing across the empty field. She's my daughter, my only family. You can't just show up and steal what's mine. Mr. Davis, please calm down, Edward said, keeping his voice low but firm. No one is stealing anything. I'm offering Maria an opportunity to have a better life. A better life? John laughed bitterly. You think I can't take care of my own daughter? You think because I'm poor, I'm a bad father? Edward's heart ached as he saw the genuine pain in the man's eyes. Beneath the anger and alcohol, there was a father who loved his daughter, albeit in a confused and destructive way. That's not it, Mr. Davis, but look at Maria. See how thin she is, how worn her clothes are. You yourself admitted you can't give her what she needs. I'll manage. John shook his fist in the air. I just need more time. I'll find a job. I'll fix our lives. Maria broke free from Edward and took a step toward her father. Dad, I know you love me, and I love you too. But what? John turned to her, his eyes filling with tears. You also think I'm no good, that you'd be better off living with this rich man. That's not it. Maria began to cry. But I just want to be able to go to school, have books, not be hungry. And I want you to be okay too. I'm okay when you're with me. John knelt on the grass, holding out his arms to her. Maria, you're all I have left of your mother. If you leave me, I'll die of sadness. Edward watched the scene with a broken heart. He saw the genuine love between father and daughter, but also realized how that love was being distorted by desperation and John's inability to provide for his family. Mr. Davis, Edward approached slowly, what if there was a way for you not to lose Maria, but for her to still have the opportunities she deserves? John looked up, suspicious. What are you talking about? What if you came to work for me? I always need men on the farm to take care of the animals, the land. You would have a steady job, a decent salary, and you could be close to Maria and her. She would live in the main house, go to the best school in the region, but you would see each other every day. It would be like an extended family. John was silent for a long moment, processing the proposal. You would do that, even after everything? I would, because I believe every man deserves a second chance, and every child deserves a family that works. Maria looked hopefully between the two men, as if afraid the dream might vanish at any moment. But there's one condition, Edward continued, his voice growing more serious. You have to stop drinking, completely. Maria has suffered enough, and she can't live in fear of having a father who disappears into a bottle every time things get tough. John lowered his head, shame washing over his features. I know I have a problem, but it's so hard when you feel like a failure. Alcohol is the only thing that eases the pain. Dad, Maria approached and touched his face. You're not a failure. You're just going through a hard time. But if Mr. Miller is offering help, maybe this is our chance to start over. Edward knelt beside them. Mr. Davis, I understand your pain. I've also been through times when I felt like a failure, but I've learned that sometimes we have to accept help to get out of the hole. John looked at his daughter, seeing in her the face of the wife he had lost. Do you really want this, Maria, to live in his house? I do, Dad, but only if you're nearby. I don't want to lose you. And what if I can't stop drinking? What if I mess everything up again? Edward placed a hand on the man's shoulder. Then we'll try again, as many times as it takes, but the first try has to start now. John was silent for several minutes, wrestling with himself. Finally, he looked up and saw something that made him make his decision. Maria was looking at him with so much love and hope that he realized he didn't have the right to destroy her dreams because of his own fears. John finally accepted Edward's proposal, but what should have been a moment of celebration soon turned into a battle against the entire social structure of Harmony Creek. The news that the richest businessman in the region had adopted a poor girl and given her alcoholic father a job spread through the town like wildfire. The next morning, Edward was awakened by the insistent ringing of his doorbell. Opening the door, he found Mayor August Faulkner accompanied by 2 councilmen, all with grave expressions that boded ill. Edward, we need to talk urgently, the mayor said, entering the house without ceremony. And good morning to you too, Edward replied ironically, leading them to the living room. There's no time for pleasantries, said Councilman Mark Peterson. The town is in an uproar over this hasty decision of yours. What hasty decision? Don't play dumb. The mayor sat in the main armchair as if he owned the place. You brought this girl to live here, gave her deadbeat father a job. And now everyone's saying Harmony Creek has become a free-for-all. Edward felt his anger rise, but controlled himself. August, I helped a child in need. Since when is that a problem? Since that help starts affecting the entire social order of our community, exploded Councilman Robert Stone. Do you have any idea how many poor families have shown up in town since yesterday? They're gathering in the square, expecting you to adopt them too. And what's the problem? If there are families in need, the problem, the mayor interrupted, is that we can't become a magnet for every indigent person in the region. Our town has always been prosperous and organized because we've maintained certain standards. Edward walked to the window, seeing Maria playing in the yard with Magnus. The girl had bathed, was wearing new clothes, and for the first time since he'd met her, she truly looked like an 8-year-old child. What standards are those, August? You know very well. Everyone in their place, everyone with their own responsibility. The rich take care of business, the poor work hard to improve their lives. There's no such thing as giving everything away on a silver platter. I'm giving her father a job. How is that a silver platter? Mark stood up, agitated. Edward, be realistic. This John is a known alcoholic. How many landowners in the area have already fired him for incompetence? And you're going to give him a job? Everyone deserves a second chance. A second chance? Robert laughed bitterly. He's had 10 second chances. The man is a lost cause. Edward turned to face them. And the girl, is she a lost cause too for being born into a poor family? The girl is her father's problem, the mayor said coldly. And it's not your responsibility to solve all the social problems of the region. Then whose responsibility is it? The three men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the question. Edward, the mayor changed his tone, trying to sound more conciliatory. We understand your charitable impulse. It's admirable, really. But you're being naive. Naive how? These people will take advantage of you. They'll suck you dry and then leave. And you'll be left with a tarnished reputation and an empty wallet. My reputation, Edward smiled ironically. August, what kind of reputation would I have if I abandoned an innocent child because of the opinions of people like you? The atmosphere in the room grew tense. The three visitors realized Edward would not be easily swayed. Very well, the mayor said, standing up. Since you've chosen this path, you need to know the consequences. What consequences? The city's contracts with your companies are being reviewed. The town council has decided it's better to work with suppliers who share our values. Edward felt his blood run cold. Those contracts represented a significant portion of his annual income. Are you blackmailing me? We're making administrative decisions based on what's best for the town, Mark said with a cynical smile. And there's more, Robert added. Several prominent families are considering pulling their accounts from the bank where you're the majority shareholder. It seems your new image doesn't inspire investor confidence. Edward realized the extent of the conspiracy against him. The local elite had united to destroy him financially if he didn't yield to their pressure. At that moment, Maria appeared at the living room door, holding a drawing she had made. Mr. Miller, I made a picture of us, she said cheerfully, but stopped when she sensed the tension in the room. The three men looked at the girl with a coldness that disgusted Edward. Is this her? The mayor asked, as if Maria were an object. Maria, go back to the yard. I'll be with you in a minute, Edward said gently. When the girl left, the mayor approached Edward. Last chance, Edward, send this girl away today, fire the father, and we can forget this whole mess. Edward looked at the drawing Maria had left on the table. It was a simple picture, him, her, and Magnus in a green pasture, all smiling. In the corner, written in crooked letters, my new family. His decision was made. Edward held Maria's drawing in his hands and felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. He looked at the three men before him, representatives of a society he had helped build and sustain for decades, and saw for the first time what they truly were. "Are you finished?" Edward asked, his voice calm but filled with an unshakable resolve. "Edward, be sensible." The mayor tried one last time. "You can still turn back." Turn back. Edward stood up, walking to the window where he could see Maria playing with Magnus. "August, you want me to abandon an 8-year-old child to protect my businesses? We want you to be responsible to the community that made you rich," Mark said sharply. Edward turned slowly, and the three men saw something in his eyes that made them instinctively recoil. "Responsible?" Edward laughed, but there was no humor in his voice. "Let me tell you a story. 50 years ago, I was that little girl out there. My parents died when I was 9, and I was left all alone in the world." The men looked at each other, uncomfortable. "Do you know who helped me? A farmer named Anthony Miller. He wasn't rich, he had no political influence, but he had the courage to adopt an orphan boy nobody wanted." Edward paused, his voice thick with emotion. "That man gave me an education, values, opportunities. Everything I am today, I owe to him." "Edward," the mayor tried to interrupt. "I'm not finished," Edward cut him off. "Anthony Miller died 20 years ago. Do you know what he told me on his deathbed? Edward, I gave you everything I could, not because you deserved it, but because every child deserves a chance. Now it's your turn to give that chance to someone else." Robert shifted restlessly in his chair. "That's very nice, but I forgot," Edward continued. "I became so obsessed with building my empire, with impressing people like you, that I forgot why I was doing it all, until I met Maria." Edward picked up the drawing from the table, showing it to the three men. "You see a threat to the social order. I see a child who reminded me of who I really am, or rather, who I should have remained." "Edward, you're being emotional," the mayor tried to argue. "Business is business. Feelings are feelings." "Exactly," Edward slammed his hand on the table. "And for years, I treated my life like a business. The result, my wife left me, I have no real friends, and you, who call yourselves my partners, are here blackmailing me." Silence filled the room. "You want to cancel my contracts? Cancel them. You want to pull your investments? Pull them. You want to destroy me financially? Try." Edward moved closer to them. "Yeah, but know this. I would rather be poor and sleep with a clear conscience than be rich and complicit in the misery of others." Mark stood up nervously. "You're going to regret this decision." "No, Mark. I regret all the times I didn't have the courage to make this decision sooner." The three men headed for the door, but Edward wasn't finished. "August," he called to the mayor, "you spoke of responsibility to the community. Let me tell you what my real responsibility is." The mayor turned, clearly annoyed. "My responsibility is to show this little girl that there are good people in the world. It's to prove to her that not all adults are selfish and cruel. It's to give her what Anthony Miller gave me, hope. And if it costs you everything you've built." Edward smiled for the first time during the entire conversation. "August, if everything I've built doesn't allow me to help a child in need, then I haven't built anything worth preserving." After the men left, Edward sat in the armchair, holding Maria's drawing. Through the window, he saw the girl running through the yard, her laughter echoing in the air. For a moment, he had a vision of the future, her growing up, studying, becoming a strong and generous woman. In that instant, he realized he had made the most important decision of his life. And for the first time in years, he felt completely at peace with himself. But the battle was just beginning. The entire town would turn against him, and he would have to find the strength to protect not only Maria, but also himself and John, who depended on the job to stay sober. Edward stood up, determined. If they wanted a war, he was ready to fight. The following weeks were the most difficult of Edward's life. The elite of Harmony Creek made good on their threats with a systematic cruelty he hadn't anticipated. The city contracts were cancelled one by one, investors pulled their funds, and even the bank where he was the majority shareholder began to face a quiet run of withdrawals. Maria, despite her young age, sensed the tension that gripped the house. Her innocent questions, "Why do you look sad?" or "Did we do something wrong?" broke Edward's heart as he struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy. John, for his part, fought bravely against his addiction. There were moments when Edward found him trembling with withdrawal, but the man refused to give up. "I won't let my daughter down again," he would repeat like a personal mantra. It was on a grey Thursday morning that the situation reached its tipping point. Edward was in his office, analyzing devastating financial reports, when Rosa burst in with a panicked look on her face. "Mr. Miller, come quick. There's a mob at the front gate." Edward ran to the window and saw a scene that chilled his blood. About 50 people were crowded at the gate of his property, many carrying signs with slogans like "Get Out," "Freeloaders," and "Harmony Creek is for workers." At the center of the crowd, Carolyn Albright was shouting through a megaphone, "Edward Miller, you've turned our peaceful town into a circus. We want this family of opportunists gone." Edward ran down the stairs and found Maria hiding behind the living room sofa, trembling with fear. John stood beside her, his face pale but determined to protect his daughter. "Mr. Miller," John said in a choked voice, "maybe it's better if I take Maria and leave. We don't want to cause any more trouble for you. Don't even think about it." Edward knelt beside Maria. "No one is taking you from here. This is your home now." "But the people outside," Maria whispered, her large eyes filled with fear. "The people outside are scared," Edward explained gently, "scared of change, scared of accepting that the world can be different. But their fear isn't more important than our family." Outside, the shouts intensified. Edward could hear Carolyn inciting the crowd. "They think they can live off our hard work. They think the poor can just set up wherever they please. I'm going to talk to them." Edward stood up, resolute. "No!" Maria clung to his leg. "They'll hurt you." "No one is going to hurt me, my dear, but it's time for some truths to be told." Edward opened the front door and walked to the gate, facing the enraged crowd alone. The shouts subsided as people saw him approach, but the hostility in the air was palpable. "Carolyn!" Edward called out, his voice strong enough for all to hear. "What is it you want exactly?" "We want you to send that family away," someone from the crowd yelled. "And why would I do that?" "Because they don't belong here," Carolyn answered. "Harmony Creek has always been a prosperous town because everyone knows their place." Edward looked at the faces before him, people he had known for years. Some he had considered friends. And what is the place of an 8-year-old child on the street, starving? "Her place is with people of her own class," shouted Helen Prescott. "Her own class," Edward repeated slowly. "Carolyn, do you remember where I came from?" Carolyn hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I was an orphan, Carolyn. Poor, with no prospects. If the people back then thought like you do now, I'd be dead today." "That was different," someone yelled. "Was it? Why? Because I was a boy, because my skin was fairer, because I was lucky enough to find someone with courage." Edward took a step forward. "Maria is the same age I was. She has the same right to hope." The crowd began to murmur, some looking less certain. "Do you want to know the truth?" Edward raised his voice. "You're not angry because Maria is poor. You're angry because she reminded me of something we'd all rather forget, that we are all responsible for each other." "That's absurd," Carolyn shouted, but her voice sounded less confident. "Is it? Then tell me, how many of you have driven down that street where Maria used to live and pretended not to see the poverty? How many of you looked away when you passed by hungry children?" The silence that followed was deafening. Edward was about to continue when he saw something that made him stop. Maria had come out of the house and was walking slowly toward him, carrying something in her hands. The girl stopped beside him and held up what she was carrying, a basket full of red apples. "I brought you some apples," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "because angry people are usually hungry for something." The impact of her words on the crowd was instantaneous and devastating. The silence that followed Maria's words was deep and heavy with emotion. The crowd, which moments before had been shouting in anger, now watched in complete stillness as the small girl offered them apples with the same naturalness with which she breathed. Carolyn Albright was the first to break the silence, but her voice came out shaky, stripped of its earlier authority. "Child, we're not hungry, we just—" "Yes, you are," Maria interrupted gently, taking a step forward. "I recognize when someone is hungry. It's the same look I used to have before I met Mr. Miller." A woman in the crowd began to cry silently. It was Mrs. Hemlock, the owner of the local boarding house, whom Edward recognized as someone who had always been kind to those in need. "My child," Mrs. Hemlock approached, kneeling to Maria's level. Aren't you angry with us? After everything we've done?" Maria tilted her head thoughtfully. "My mother taught me that anger is like carrying a heavy stone in your chest. It only hurts the one carrying it." She held out an apple to Mrs. Hemlock. "And my dad always says that angry people are usually hurting on the inside." Mrs. Hemlock accepted the apple with trembling hands and hugged her. Others began to approach, but not all. A group led by Carolyn remained unyielding. "This is all very touching," Carolyn said, regaining some of her haughtiness. But sweet words don't change reality. This child and her father are still a problem for our town." "What problem?" a new voice asked. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Mr. Abe, the market vendor, who had given Maria her first apple. He approached, carrying a large crate. "What problem have they caused, Mrs. Albright?" Mr. Abe repeated. "Since they've been here, John hasn't had a single drop to drink. He works hard at Mr. Miller's farm, never missed a day. And the girl," he smiled at Maria, "the girl helps anyone who needs it." "What do you mean?" Edward asked, surprised. "She shows up at the market every Saturday," Mr. Abe explained. "Helps the elderly carry their groceries, plays with crying toddlers so their mothers can shop in peace, and last week she rescued Mrs. Gable's cat from a tree." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. People began to share small stories about Maria that Edward hadn't known. "She helped my granddaughter with her homework," said one woman. "She shared her lunch with me when I forgot my money," an old man added. "And she never asked for anything in return," Mr. Abe concluded. "She just helps, like it's the most natural thing in the world." Edward looked at Maria with a pride that overflowed from his chest. The girl had won over the town without him even knowing. One person at a time, with her genuine kindness. Carolyn, realizing she was losing support, made one last attempt. Even so, that doesn't change the fact that Edward is setting a dangerous precedent. If every wealthy person in the region starts adopting poor children, what would happen? Interrupted Father Michael, who had just arrived. Would the world become a better place? The priest, a figure respected by all, walked to the center of the group. "Carolyn, you are criticizing a man for doing exactly what Christ taught us, to love thy neighbor as thyself." "Father, the situation is more complex," Carolyn tried to argue. "Is it?" The priest took an apple from Maria's basket and took a bite. "A child offers food to those who reject her. A rich man opens his home to the needy. A father fights his demons to be better. Where is the complexity in that?" The crowd began to disperse slowly. Some approached Edward to apologize. Others simply left in silence. Carolyn and her most radical supporters departed without a word, but Edward knew the battle was far from over. When they were finally alone at the gate, John approached Edward with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Miller, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me, John. You held up your end of the bargain. You stopped drinking. You work hard. You take good care of Maria. But I almost ruined everything for you." Edward placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "John, what almost ruined us was the cruelty of people who forgot what it means to be human. You and Maria reminded me." Maria approached the two men, still holding her basket with a few apples left. "Mr. Miller," she said, "can I give these apples to Magnus? I think he must be hungry too after all that noise." Edward smiled, scooping her up into his arms. Of course you can, and you know what? I think Magnus would be very happy if you officially became my daughter. What do you think? Maria's eyes lit up. For real, I can be your real daughter, if you want to be, and if your father allows it. John nodded vigorously, too emotional to speak. Then yes, Maria shouted, hugging Edward tightly. I really, really want to. At that moment, under the blue sky of Harmony Creek, three people brought together by fate sealed a bond that no amount of social pressure could ever break. A year later, on a golden spring morning, Maria rode through the farm's fields on Magnus, her crystal-clear laughter echoing through the fresh country air, her simple but well-kept clothes, her hair in braids that shone in the sun, and above all, her radiant smile told the story of a transformation that went far beyond appearances. Edward watched from the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands, his heart overflowing with a happiness he never knew was possible. The house, which had once echoed with his lonely memories, now vibrated with the energy of a real family. "Daddy Edward!" Maria shouted, waving from atop the horse. "Look how happy Magnus is today." "Be careful, my daughter," he called back, but his tone was affectionate, not worried. Maria had become an excellent rider, and Magnus protected her as if she were his own. John appeared from the stables, his straight posture and sun-tanned face a dramatic contrast to the broken man Edward had met a year earlier. Sobriety, maintained day after day with iron determination, had restored not only his health, but his dignity and self-respect. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," John greeted, tipping his hat. "The horses are all tended to, and the new pasture is ready for the new cattle." "John, how many times do I have to tell you? Your family here. You can just call me Edward." John smiled, but still kept the formalism he considered a way of showing gratitude. "It's just that I'm still not used to it, sir. A year ago I was a useless drunk. And now you're an exemplary father and one of the best employees I've ever had," Edward finished. "And more importantly, you're a friend." Just then, a small convoy of station wagons and minivans appeared on the road leading to the farm. Edward smiled, recognizing the visitors. It was the third Saturday of the month, the day Maria had insisted on creating a special event. "They're here!" Maria shouted, urging Magnus to gallop back to the house. "Daddy Edward, they're here!" The term Daddy Edward always warmed his heart. Maria had started calling him that spontaneously, and he couldn't imagine a sweeter sound. The cars parked in the farmyard, and out of them poured about 20 children of various ages, all from the most needy families in the region. Maria had convinced Edward to create a monthly program where these children could spend the day at the farm, receiving a nutritious meal, clothes when needed, and most importantly, a chance to simply be kids. "Maria! Maria!" the children shouted in unison, running to hug her. "Everyone!" Maria shouted back, dismounting Magnus with agility. "I have a surprise for you today." Edward watched his daughter lead the excited group of children, handing out hugs and smiles with the same generosity with which she had offered her apple to Magnus on that first day. The girl who had nothing had become the richest child he knew, rich in love, in kindness, in the capacity to give. Rosa appeared on the porch, now assisted by two other women from town, whom Edward had hired specifically to help on the children's visit days. The large table in the garden was already set with colorful plates and a hearty meal that would make any child smile. "Edward," a familiar voice called him. He turned to see Mr. Abe, the market vendor, accompanied by Mrs. Hemlock and, surprisingly, Father Michael. "Abe, it's good to see you all." Edward came down to greet them. "We came for the children's lunch," Mrs. Hemlock explained, "but also to give you some news." "What news?" Father Michael smiled. "The town council has officially approved the Little Hearts program, based on what you and Maria created here. Other towns in the region want to implement similar programs." Edward was moved. The program, born from Maria's generous heart, was spreading beyond the borders of Harmony Creek. "And there's more," Mr. Abe added. "3 business owners from neighboring towns have contacted the council wanting to form partnerships to help families in need. It seems kindness is contagious." Just then, Maria approached, pulling a small, visibly shy and thin boy of about 6 by the hand. "Daddy Edward," she said, "this is Peter. He's an orphan like I was. Do you think—" Edward knelt to the boy's level, seeing in those frightened eyes the same fear and hope he had seen in Maria's a year before. "Hi, Peter," Edward said gently. "Do you like horses?" The boy nodded shyly. "How about Maria teaches you to ride Magnus after lunch?" The boy's eyes lit up, and Edward knew another seed was being planted. As he watched Maria lead all the children to the lunch table, Edward reflected on the miracle that had happened in his life. An 8-year-old girl who offered her only apple to a hungry horse had transformed not just his life, but an entire community. The circle of kindness, which began with a simple gesture in a dusty pasture, now expanded in waves that touched lives throughout the region. And Edward knew this was just the beginning. Maria came up to him, holding a bright red apple. "For you, Daddy Edward," she said, offering him the fruit. "Because people who do good things deserve good things too." Edward accepted the apple, knowing he was holding much more than a fruit. He was holding the proof that one generous heart can change the world, one person at a time. Looking at his daughter, at the laughing children around the table, at John working with dignity, and at the friends who had gathered to celebrate kindness, Edward knew he had found true wealth, and it had all started with a girl brave enough to give her only apple to a sad horse.